High in the mountains, where silence hides the scars of forgotten wars, a wounded dog lay abandoned by the roadside, its body broken, its spirit fading. But fate had other plans. When Jack, a solitary mechanic with a past he rarely speaks of, stumbled upon the animal, he had no idea that this encounter would unravel a chilling truth buried deep within the shadows of military secrecy. What began as an act of kindness turns into a dangerous journey of justice, sacrifice, and redemption. Because this dog, codenamed Ranger, was never meant to be found, and someone will do anything to keep it that way. It was a cold, foggy morning in the mountains, the kind where the chill seeps deep into your bones, and the world feels still, suspended in silence. Jack, an old mechanic with calloused hands and a weathered soul, was driving his battered pickup truck along the narrow, winding road. His eyes, tired from years of solitude, scanned the road ahead. Then, through the thick mist, he noticed something strange. A figure, half hidden in the gravel, lying still. His heart skipped a beat, an instinct pulled him to a stop. He stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching on the frost-covered ground, and as he approached, the figure came into focus, a German shepherd, bloodied and barely breathing. For a moment, time seemed to stretch. Jack's breath hitched in his chest as he crouched down beside the dog. Its fur was matted with blood, its once strong body limp and trembling. The dog's eyes, though clouded with pain, still held a flicker of recognition, a spark of something Jack couldn't quite place. Fear? Trust? Desperation? It didn't matter. Jack's rough hands trembled as he gently stroked the dog's fur, the cold air biting at his skin, but there was a warmth growing in his chest. This dog, this poor, broken creature, needed him. And Jack couldn't just drive away. Without thinking, he pulled off his flannel jacket and carefully wrapped it around the dog's frail body. The dog whimpered softly, but Jack could feel its shallow breaths, could see the faintest glimmer of hope in those eyes. He didn't know what had happened or how the animal had ended up here, but he wasn't about to let it die alone. He lifted the dog gently, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't voice, and placed it in the passenger seat of his truck. As he started the engine, his gaze flickered to the rearview mirror, his thoughts already swirling with questions. What had led the dog here? And why did it seem like fate had placed it in his path? He didn't have the answers, but something deep inside him told him he couldn't turn back now. The truck's engine hummed steadily as Jack drove through the winding, fog-drenched roads. His eyes barely blinked, fixated on the road ahead, but his mind was elsewhere, on the dog in the passenger seat. It had been limp and lifeless when he found it, lying by the side of the road like a forgotten soul. Its once beautiful fur, now matted with dirt and blood, and its shallow, labored breathing tugged at his heart. Jack didn't know why he had stopped. Maybe it was the helpless look in the dog's eyes, the way it seemed to beg for rescue, or maybe it was the familiar feeling of something lost, something that needed to be saved. With each mile that passed, Jack's grip on the steering wheel tightened. His palms were slick with sweat, though the cold air of the morning seeped in through the cracked window, biting at his skin. He tried to focus on the road, on the steady rhythm of the tires rolling over the gravel, but the images of the dog, its silent suffering, played on a loop in his mind. What had happened to it? Why had no one else stopped? The fog grew thicker as the truck climbed higher, obscuring the path ahead. Jack's breath hitched as a strange sense of urgency gripped him. He didn't know what he was racing against, time, fate, or his own growing fear that he was too late. His eyes flicked to the dog again, watching the rise and fall of its chest. The sight stirred something inside him, a feeling he hadn't acknowledged in years. Guilt. Compassion. A need to fix something, anything. It was a familiar ache, one he had buried deep within himself, a feeling that had disappeared after the world had left him behind. As the truck rumbled to a stop in front of his cabin, Jack's hands shook as he reached for the door handle. The cold air hit him like a punch to the chest, but he barely felt it. His heart was racing, not from the exertion of driving, but from a deep, instinctive urgency to get the dog inside, to save it. His boots crunched against the gravel as he moved quickly to the passenger side, his gaze never leaving the animal. The moment his hands touched the dog, he was struck by how fragile it felt, like it could break apart at any second. He gently lifted it, cradling its body to his chest as though it were made of glass. Inside, the warmth of the cabin seemed to breathe life back into the space. Jack moved swiftly, his body moving on autopilot, but his mind was anything but calm. He set the dog down on an old wool blanket by the hearth, the flickering firelight casting long, wavering shadows across the room. His fingers trembled as he reached for the first aid kit, the dog's blood still staining his hands. He pressed a rag to the animal's wounds, his movements careful but hurried, as though every second mattered. The dog winced as Jack applied the ointment, and for a brief moment, he froze, caught between the instinct to comfort it and the knowledge that he didn't know how to fix this. He was just a man who had learned to survive in a world that had moved on without him. But in that moment, with the dog's eyes flickering open to meet his, something shifted. It wasn't just a stray animal in need of help, it was something more. A silent plea, a shared understanding. Jack wasn't sure why, but he felt as if their paths had crossed for a reason. He spoke softly to the dog, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know it hurts, I know. I'll stay with you." His words were simple, but there was a depth to them, a truth he hadn't voiced in years. The silence of the cabin enveloped them both, and Jack continued tending to the dog, applying bandages and wiping away the blood, all the while lost in a sea of thoughts. As the fire crackled, Jack sat back on his heels, watching the dog's breathing even out, its eyes drifting closed. For a moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace settle over him. He was used to solitude, had lived most of his life in its grasp, but something about the dog, vulnerable and trusting, shifted the air around him. He wasn't alone anymore. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could face it. Jack slowly ran his hand over the dog's fur, a silent promise forming in his heart. "You're not alone anymore. Neither of us are." The words lingered in the stillness, and as the fire burned low, he let himself relax, allowing the warmth to seep into his bones. He knew, in that moment, that this wasn't just about saving a dog. It was about saving himself. The wind outside howled against the walls of the cabin, sending shivers down Jack's spine as he knelt next to the dog. His hand was trembling slightly as he gently brushed the animal's matted fur. The warmth of its body against the cold floor was a contrast that made the isolation of the cabin feel even more profound. The dog stirred slightly under his touch, its eyes flickering open, slow and weary. Jack's heart ached as he saw the uncertainty in its gaze, the same uncertainty he had been carrying around for years, though he had never been able to put a name to it until now. He pulled his hand away for a moment, letting the dog settle. There was a stillness in the room, a tension that seemed to hang between them, neither willing to move too quickly. Jack wasn't sure what he was doing anymore. Was he just helping an animal in need, or was something deeper at play here? Was it fate, or mere coincidence, that had brought him here? To this point in his life where he had spent years trying to shut himself off from everything, from feeling, from caring? He had come to this cabin, this refuge, hoping to escape the world and the pain that came with it. But now, with this dog lying in front of him, Jack couldn't shake the nagging thought that maybe he had been running for more than just the past. The dog's whimper snapped him from his thoughts. Its eyes were still open, and it seemed to be looking at him, not with fear, but with something else, something that felt like trust. Jack swallowed hard, his throat tight as if something had lodged there, blocking his breath. He never thought he'd see the day when he would open up to an animal, let alone feel responsible for its well-being. But here he was, his heart starting to break as he realized how fragile the situation was. The dog had been abandoned, its life hanging by a thread, just as his own had felt, time and time again. He stood up abruptly, the motion almost jerky, as though trying to outrun the thoughts that were slowly rising to the surface. His boots thudded against the wooden floor as he paced around the room. The weight of the silence was almost suffocating, like a reminder of everything he had shut out for so long. The walls of the cabin, once a safe haven, now felt confining, almost suffocating. He hated this feeling, the vulnerability creeping up on him. He had built this fortress of solitude around himself for a reason, to avoid precisely this sense of connection. But here he was, watching this dog breathe in shallow, fragile gasps, and feeling something he hadn't in years, the need to protect, to care. He rubbed a hand over his face, the stubble there rough against his skin. "Get a grip, Jack," he muttered to himself, his voice low and raw. He had always been alone, always been the one who kept his distance from others, who preferred the company of his own thoughts. It had been easier that way. But now, this small, defenseless creature was forcing him to face something he had never wanted to confront, the possibility that he didn't have to be alone anymore. Jack shook his head, his fingers running through his hair in frustration. What was he supposed to do with this? With this need? He had shut out so many people over the years, family, friends, even those who had once been close, and now, this dog was asking for something from him he hadn't given anyone in a long time, trust. And somehow, it seemed to demand something of him in return, a willingness to open up, to accept the fragile connection that was being offered, however unspoken it might be. He crouched down again beside the dog, his eyes meeting its tired gaze. The animal's chest rose and fell in slow, deliberate breaths, and Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of kinship. He could see it now, this dog was no different from him. They both had their scars, their history of being broken, of being cast aside. Yet, here they were, surviving. Fighting for something more, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. "Don't worry," Jack whispered softly, his voice barely audible. He leaned in closer, his hand moving to rest gently on the dog's side. "I won't leave you. Not like this." The words came out without thinking, but they felt heavier than he expected. There was something in them that he hadn't realized he needed to say. It wasn't just a promise to the dog, it was a promise to himself. For the first time in a long while, Jack was allowing himself to care about something again, something other than the walls he had built around his heart. The dog let out a soft sigh, its eyes closing once more. Jack remained seated beside it, his hand still resting on the warm fur, as the fire crackled softly in the background. He wasn't sure what the future held, or whether this was some kind of test he wasn't prepared for. But in this moment, with the dog beside him, Jack found himself doing something he hadn't in years. He was letting go, just a little. Letting himself be vulnerable. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like maybe that was enough. Jack sat frozen, his hand trembling as it rested on the doorframe, his fingers digging into the worn wood as if he could hold on to the reality around him by sheer force of will. The storm outside howled, the wind carrying the faint crackle of the blizzard, but inside the cabin, it was quiet. Too quiet. The only sound was the low hum of the fire, its flickering light casting dancing shadows across the walls. The dog, still lying on the makeshift bed, breathed in shallow, rhythmic intervals, a soft whimper escaping every now and then, as if it were trying to summon some strength that it didn't have. Jack's heart was racing, pounding in his ears. The weight of the responsibility he had just accepted was beginning to settle over him like a heavy cloak. He hadn't asked for this. He had spent so many years living alone, carving out his own existence, free from the messiness of human connection. But now, here he was, tethered to this small, fragile creature who needed him in a way he wasn't sure he could fulfill. The realization hit him hard. He couldn't simply walk away from this. Not anymore. His eyes flickered toward the dog, whose dark eyes were now fixed on him. There was something raw in those eyes, something desperate that pulled at Jack in a way he wasn't ready for. The animal's trembling form seemed to be a reflection of Jack himself, a creature trying to survive in a world that felt far too harsh, too cold. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, trying to shake the feelings that threatened to overwhelm him. He wasn't a hero. He didn't know how to be the person this dog needed. All his life, he had been running from his own emotions, burying them beneath layers of indifference. But now, standing here, staring down at the dog that was placing its fragile trust in him, Jack realized he couldn't keep running. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the air felt thick, oppressive. The uncertainty gnawed at him, twisting his stomach into tight knots. He was terrified. Not of the dog, no, that wasn't it. But terrified of what this moment meant. He had spent so many years perfecting the art of isolation. And now, in this tiny cabin, with a dog that needed him, he was faced with the terrifying truth that he couldn't remain untouched, unfeeling, anymore. Jack's gaze shifted back to the dog. He didn't know what to do. His mind was racing, 1,000 thoughts colliding with each other in a chaotic mess. Could he help? Was he capable of helping? Could he keep this creature alive when he wasn't even sure he could keep himself whole? The doubts piled on, but Jack pushed them back, forcing himself to focus. His feet moved before his mind had fully caught up. He knelt beside the bed, his knees creaking as he lowered himself to the dog's level. The animal flinched slightly as he approached, but Jack didn't pull away. Instead, he reached out, gently placing his hand on the dog's side. The warmth of its body against his palm sent a shock of heat through him, stirring something deep inside that he couldn't quite name. The dog didn't react violently, didn't try to pull away. Instead, it laid its head down, its breathing a little more even. It was the smallest of gestures, but for Jack, it felt monumental. He was needed. And, in this moment, he needed to be needed. His fingers brushed through the dog's fur, careful not to hurt it, but the touch was more for himself than for the animal. It was a connection, however small, and it gave him a strange sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in years. He couldn't explain it, but in that moment, he felt less alone. For the first time in a long while, Jack allowed himself to feel the weight of responsibility, the burden that came with caring for another living being. But then, the sound of the door knocking, a quick, insistent rapping, shattered the fragile peace Jack had found. His body stiffened instantly. His heart leapt into his throat, and for a brief, panicked moment, he froze. He hadn't expected anyone. He hadn't wanted anyone. The isolation, the silence, had been his sanctuary for so long. Who could it be? The thought of someone else entering this fragile, vulnerable space made him sick to his stomach. He had come here to escape, to be alone, to find something resembling peace. Now, that peace was slipping away from him, one knock at a time. He stood up quickly, his legs unsteady, and his eyes shot to the door, his mind racing. The storm outside was loud, relentless, but the knock had a clarity to it. It wasn't random. It wasn't some wandering traveler seeking shelter. No, this felt deliberate. The tension in Jack's chest tightened, a lump forming in his throat as he slowly made his way to the door. He couldn't let anyone in. He couldn't deal with this, not with the dog still lying there, vulnerable, needing him. "Who's there?" Jack called out, his voice harsh and tight, his pulse hammering in his ears. He gripped the doorknob, his hands slick with sweat, his breathing shallow. It was an effort to keep his voice even, to not let the fear seep into it. The man outside didn't respond right away. Jack's breath caught in his throat as the sound of the wind shifted, and the figure outside seemed to grow more menacing. "I'm looking for someone," the man's voice came through the door, calm but weighted with something Jack couldn't decipher. "Thought I might find him here." Jack's stomach flipped. He couldn't let this stranger in, couldn't risk anyone knowing where he was, what he had done. He had barely processed the reality of the dog's presence, of the fragile bond they had begun to form, and now, this. His heart pounded harder. His mind spun, calculating his next move. Could he make it to the window? Could he escape before the man could make his way inside? "Who are you really?" Jack demanded, his voice more forceful now. His heart was a jackhammer in his chest, his thoughts racing faster than he could keep up with. "You need to leave." There was a long pause, the man outside silent for a moment. Then, he spoke again, his voice measured and almost cold. "I don't think you understand. I'm not here for you. I'm here for the dog." Jack's entire body froze. The world seemed to tilt, and for a moment, everything inside him went still. He didn't know what to think, didn't know what to say. The dog? The man knew about the dog? How? The thoughts came too fast, colliding with each other in a frenzy. Who was this man? Why was he looking for the dog? And what did it mean for Jack, for everything he had just begun to understand about himself and the path he was walking? Jack's pulse thudded in his ears, a deafening sound in the otherwise silent room. His fingers, gripping the doorframe, were slick with sweat. The weight of the stranger's words lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. "I'm here for the dog." The sentence was so simple, yet it carried an undercurrent of menace that sent a shiver down Jack's spine. He felt his breath hitch in his throat, every muscle in his body freezing, unable to move. The cabin, once his sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage. He wanted to lash out, to slam the door shut, to fight back, but something held him there, rooted to the spot, his gaze flicking anxiously over his shoulder toward the bed where the dog lay. The animal was still, too still, eyes wide, watching the door. Jack's stomach twisted in knots. He couldn't explain it, but the dog had become more than just a companion, it had become a part of him, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it from him. "Who are you?" Jack's voice cracked on the words, and he hated how weak it sounded. He was supposed to be strong. He was supposed to protect. But this man, this stranger, was breaking through the very walls Jack had built around himself. The man outside the door remained silent for a moment, his presence pressing against the thin barrier of wood like a storm waiting to break. Jack's heart pounded harder, faster, as he waited for the man's response, but when it came, it was calm, too calm. "I'm not here to hurt you, Jack," the man said, his voice smooth and measured. "I just want the dog. It's not yours to protect." Jack felt his fists clench, his teeth grinding against the words that wanted to spill from his lips. Not his to protect? What kind of absurdity was that? The dog had been through hell, hell that Jack had no intention of letting it revisit. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as Jack took a step back, every nerve in his body screaming at him to lock the door, to shut this all out, to keep the animal safe. But his feet were like lead. He felt trapped between his fear and his instincts, fear of the unknown, fear of what this man might do if he crossed that line, and the instinct to protect the dog that had found him, that had saved him from his own darkness. Jack glanced at the dog again. It was looking at him with eyes that seemed to plead for help, but not in a way that suggested it was helpless. There was something more in its gaze, something desperate, something that screamed of a history Jack couldn't even begin to understand. "Why?" Jack managed to choke out. His voice trembled, but he stood firm. What does it mean? What does it know? Silence followed. The wind howled outside, the trees shaking in the violent gusts. It was like the entire world was holding its breath. The man on the other side of the door didn't answer at first. But Jack could hear him, faintly, shifting his weight as if he was making a decision. Then, finally, the words came, cold and matter-of-fact. "You don't get it, do you?" The man's tone was almost pitying. "It's not just a dog. It's been trained for something you'll never be able to comprehend." His voice softened, as if he were trying to explain something too complicated for Jack to understand. "The dog is a key. It holds information. Information you're not ready to hear." Jack's breath hitched, his mind racing with the implications of the words. Information? What did the dog know? And why had it come to him? His mind was spinning, but there was one thing he knew for sure: the man couldn't be trusted. Whatever he wanted, whatever he claimed to know, it didn't matter. Jack wasn't going to give up the dog. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. "I don't care what you think you know," Jack said, his voice low, but fierce. "You're not getting in." The man's response was chilling in its calmness. "You'll regret this, Jack. You think you're protecting it, but you're just a pawn. It's not yours to protect." A cold knot formed in Jack's stomach, but he forced himself to remain composed. He couldn't let this man see his fear. He couldn't let him see how close he was to breaking. The dog had trusted him, and Jack had promised to protect it, no matter the cost. The man outside the door sighed, a long, drawn-out exhale that sounded almost bored. "You have no idea what you're up against. This isn't over." There was a sharp, heavy silence, and then the sound of footsteps moving away from the door, retreating into the distance. Jack stood frozen, his hands still gripping the doorframe as if he were holding on to the last shred of his resolve. His heart was racing, but the immediate danger seemed to pass. But even as the tension began to ease, Jack knew that this wasn't over. The man's words echoed in his mind, each one digging deeper into his thoughts. Not yours to protect. What did that even mean? And what kind of game was this man playing? He turned slowly, his eyes searching the room for answers, but all he saw was the dog lying there, its gaze still fixed on him. It was so still, so silent. Jack took a deep breath, trying to steady his shaking hands. He had to protect it. He had to keep the promise he'd made. But the truth lingered heavily in the air. Whatever was coming, Jack wasn't ready for it. The dog wasn't just an animal, and the man outside the door wasn't just a stranger. They were part of something bigger, something far more dangerous than Jack had ever imagined. In the end, Jack didn't just rescue a dying animal, he gave a voice to the voiceless and exposed a truth long buried beneath silence and shame. Ranger, once discarded like a broken tool, became a symbol of resilience and loyalty. Together, they defied the odds, faced the ghosts of a hidden past, and reminded us all of the power of compassion. If their story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Because somewhere out there, another truth waits to be uncovered, and another soul waits to be saved.